Sometimes I like to think about life as a journey of learning, as a journey we're on, and what God hopes for us is that it be a journey of learning. And Giles of our congregation made us a lovely set of communion plates for the bread. We won't be using them today because I wanted to have one out here to show you, but you can't all see it when we're sitting, but it's really lovely because pressed into the plate where the bread will be sitting are wheat, grains of wheat, little sheaves of wheat. And that's a beautiful symbol, first of all, for bread. Obviously, it's the plate that holds the bread. And as the early Christians said, as the grains of wheat once scattered on the hills are gathered into one to become one bread, so may all your people from all the ends of earth be gathered into one in you. So the grains of wheat are lovely symbols of all of us as God's people being gathered together to share the meal. But if we think about a journey of learning, what I also like about the wheat is this is a growing plant. That the wheat is useful. The wheat produces bread because it grows up out of the seeds. And so life is a process of growing. Life is a process of learning. And we, as God's people, come here to be fed by God with the bread, and that feeding helps us to grow. That feeding helps us to learn. So being God's people, being Christians, being part of the followers of Jesus is a process of growing and learning. And like there are seasons for growing, the seasons of planting, the seasons of harvesting, we oftentimes have seasons in the life of the church. And we have the liturgical seasons with the colors, but we also have the season of school. We come back to school in September to our own church program. And I'll be giving a few more details of that at announcement time. But this today, Sunday school starts, adult forum starts. During the week, the Bible classes will start. We kind of have a season of learning for ourselves. Now, I admit that to think about life as a journey of learning could be kind of a scary image for us, partly dependent on what school was like for us. We can all look back to our school years, and there probably were some good moments, and then there probably were some kind of scary moments. I remember when I was in the first grade, and I was called upon to spell the word red, and I could not spell the word red. Someone had to whisper the first letter to me from behind. And there are times in our learning when all of a sudden we realize there are things we just don't know. And there are times when we fumble for answers. And there are times when we face tests and are not sure what we're going to do on the tests. So there are scary aspects to learning. But that's not what God wants for us. God is not a strict principle handing out tests all the time with the hope of catching people in what they don't know and flunking them out of school. That's not the God that's revealed to us by Jesus Christ. God delights in us growing and in learning. And God knows there are times when we don't know what to do, and times when we have to learn what to do, and sometimes we even learn through our mistakes, and yet God is constantly with us. What God wants for us is a real adventure. Think of a time when you got to learn something that was really fun to do. I remember when I was learning how to drive. Now, there were moments when I was first learning how to drive where that too was scary. First time parking, first time heavy traffic. There were some scary moments. When I finally could drive, when I could finally get into the car and drive off by myself, that was a wonderful feeling. God wants life to be a journey of learning for us so that we can grow, so we can develop, so we can use our gifts, so we can delight in life. That's the kind of learning God wants for us. And we learn in lots of different ways, but we also learn here at church. Part of our learning is when we gather together for Bible study and so forth. You also learn every day of your life through life experiences and so forth. But God wants that for us. What's interesting, what I was noticing when I was thinking about today being the opening day of Sunday school and adult forum, that our lessons for today are moments when the Christian community is working on learning something. Particularly the second lesson and the gospel lesson today, they have some common threads about time when God's people and the followers of Jesus needed to learn specifically who all was part of the family, who all was part of God's beloved family. The gospel lesson that we heard read just a minute ago. It says that Jesus was traveling with his disciples, and he was traveling up in the north of Israel. In fact, he went across the border of Israel to the region of the city of Tyre. Now, in today's map, that he went into Lebanon and Syria. Okay? Now you know how in today's world there's a lot of tension there's outright warfare at times between Israel and Lebanon and Syria. And back in Jesus' day, there also was a lot of tension. And amongst Jesus' people, there was a real feeling that the Israelites, were the people of God. The Israelites were part of God's family. But the Gentiles, the non-Jews, were not a part of God's family, and didn't deserve the same kind of blessings from God as they did. So Jesus goes up into this non-Israelite area, and what happens? A woman comes up to him, a woman from that area, a Syro-Phoenician woman. That was people living along the coast of Syria. And her daughter was very ill. She begged Jesus to come home, to come and heal her daughter. And Jesus said, we don't immediately realize what he's talking about, but Jesus said to her, shouldn't the children be fed first? It's not right that the children's food be thrown to the dogs. Now, what was he talking about? When he talked about children, he was saying that God's true children, from the perspective of the Israelite, God's true children were the Israelites. He's saying, my power, I've come with my power, but shouldn't I be using my power to care for God's true children, the Israelites? I shouldn't take God's blessings, God's food, and just throw it to the dogs. He was referring to what many of the Israelites thought in those days, or considered the Syrians, the non-Jews, to be like dogs. Now, in our day, in our world, here in the United States anyway, dogs are very loved and cared for. Dogs are pampered and cared for. That's not the way it was in first century Israel, even in third world today. If you've been on our Mexico mission and gone to Tijuana, there are some dogs that are cared for inside people's houses, but there's just a lot of street dogs that are fighting for survival. The word dog in first century communication was a real put down. It was a real word of scorn. Dogs were scavengers. They were unhealthy and unholy. Jesus is putting out on the table the attitude that most Israelites had towards non-Israelites, that everybody else was dogs, they weren't part of the family. He was putting it out there for everybody to look at, for everybody to see, is this really true or not? He said, this is your attitude. In a way, he was talking to his disciples and saying, this is how you often consider it. In fact, in Matthew's gospel, the disciples tried to shoo the woman away. They tried to tell the woman to leave the presence of Jesus. She didn't have the right to be asking what she was asking. The woman comes back to Jesus with great faith and great courage. She says, yes, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from the children's table. Even the dogs get the leftovers, she was saying. The woman's faith is that she knew that she too was loved by God. She knew that God's love isn't limited to just this group or that group. God's love was for everybody. God's healing was for everybody. She was actually speaking that word of faith, that word of trust, that God cared for her even though she lived outside the borders, even though she was a foreigner. And Jesus recognized her faith in front of everybody. He said, for saying this, it will be. You have claimed God's goodness appropriately. Go home now. And when she went home, her daughter had been healed. The power of God came through and healed her, the power of Jesus.